Alright, let's get started with this list. In at number 10, we have Tyler Edmonds, who was 13 years old when he falsely confessed to a murder he never did. Well, that moment will haunt him for the rest of his life because he spent 14 years behind bars trying to prove that he never committed the murder. At 13 years old, it's hard to understand certain things. The legal system is very complex in how it works. Well, this is Tyler Edmonds' story.
Time in prison took so many experiences away from me.
Tyler's sister, who actually committed the awful crime, convinced her brother to take the blame for her.
Christy convinced me to confess at her mother's house. That's when she told me that she was the one who had killed Joey.
Tyler's older sister kept telling him that you have to take the blame. You're only 13 years old, so nothing is actually going to happen. But if I take the blame, I'm gonna be in prison forever. She also said that they don't punish children. Tyler's never ever been sent to a principal's office before. He's never gotten in trouble. And he actually believed his sister, because why not? It's family.
Jalal County Sheriff's Department, and your name is Tyler Edmonds, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And your age 13?
Yes, sir.
He looked so damn young in the video because, well, he was. I think there should be a parent involved. Or if this kid is about to give a confession, I think a lawyer should be present. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comment section below.
Moving on to number 9, we have the Night Stalker. Richard Ramirez, otherwise known as the Night Stalker, was an American serial killer and robber who killed 13 to 16 plus individuals. At his trials, the judge stated that he never showed any remorse for these doings. I think the creepiest part about his interview is when he admits to being evil.
Do you admit to being evil, Richard?
We are all evil in some form or another, are we not? Yes, I am evil. Not 100%, but I am evil.
And we see him try to justify his killings by saying the government does worse things to people than what he has done.
Serial killers do on a small scale what governments do on a large one. They are a product of the times, and these are bloodthirsty times. Even psychopaths have emotions if you dig deep enough, but then again, maybe they don't.
In our 8th spot, we have Edward Edwards. Edward Wayne Edwards, otherwise known as the Hook Man or the Man with the Hook, was an American con artist turned serial killer. In fact, when he committed his long list of crimes, he never wore a mask because he wanted to be famous. In 2010, he did an interview and confessed to all his crimes. Again, it makes me so uncomfortable listening to how killers took someone's life.
Taking his hand, he's going through the bottom of the duffel bag trying to find the cigarettes, and I'm standing right here, and I have the sawed-off shotgun, and I ease it out of the bag while Danny's down there looking, and
He's just too calm talking about all of this. During the interview, he also stated that he wanted the death penalty and thinks that he deserves it.
I want the death penalty.
You don't want to be in prison for a long time on everything else that's going on.
Right, I'm not a healthy man.
In our 7th spot, we have Paris Bennett. During an interview with Piers Morgan, Paris Bennett, who at 13 years of age killed his young sister, admits that he did this as a way to punish his mother.
Specifically in the end,
Yes.
to cause your mother maximum pain. This has achieved your goal, which was to effectively mean your mother lost both her children at once.
In 2007, Bennett convinced their babysitter to leave early and then proceeded to stab his sister 17 times. It's such a tragic case. What makes it worse is how he pretends to say he loved his sister. In the interview, he was asked to describe why he loved his sister, and he couldn't.
Because I loved her. I loved her with every fiber of my being.
They say it's like asking a colorblind person to describe the color red. They can't do it. He can't describe love because he can't feel it.
Exactly like she said, it's because Paris is incapable of feeling emotions. No guilt, no love, nothing. Moving on to number 6, we have Angela Simpson.
Right.
You murdered this man.
Yes.
You tortured him.
Of course.
This is an interview with killer Angela Simpson. She was arrested after torturing and killing a man in a wheelchair for snitching. During this interview, she tells exactly what happened, how she did it, and why. The scariest part is how forward she is about this all. She doesn't care that she's going to prison or that she killed someone.
You're not here to pretend to be remorseful.
Of course not. Why would I do that?
Are you remorseful?
Not at all.
She's not remorseful at all, and she's very open about everything.
To my house, walked him down the street. I don't know why the media acts like the mother couldn't walk. He walked very well. Walked him upstairs, kicked his ass.
Like, imagine being okay with taking someone's life. This interview sends shivers down my spine just listening to her and watching the stillness in her body and the calmness in her voice. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with Manuel Vela. In 2016, a 28-year-old man, Manuel Vela, was arrested after killing his girlfriend and their unborn baby. In this interview, you can tell that Manuel suffered from schizophrenia. He claims that the father told him to kill his girlfriend and her baby. Keep in mind, he is the father to her baby. And then he says that he is the Antichrist.
And that's where I cut her open, when he told me to.
When who told you to?
The father, it's just the same one who was to communicate with Jesus Christ is when he was here.
Although it seems like he is intoxicated during this interview, he is not. He's just experiencing hallucinations and delusions. In this interview, he also claims he would receive commands from outer space and extraterrestrials. A lot of people found this interview disturbing just because you can see how far gone Manuel is. He's no longer in control of himself. In our 4th spot, we have Arthur Shawcross. Arthur John Shawcross was an American serial killer in Rochester, New York that took the lives of 13 individuals. His first 2 murders were committed in 1972. He was caught for both and then sentenced to 25 years. But after serving 15 years, he was released on parole. That's when he continued on with the killings and took the lives of 11 different people. His interview is creepy for a number of reasons.
Do you remember killing her?
Yeah, possibly.
He gives me the chills. He's just twitching and his voice is just so unnerving. But it gets worse once he starts talking about his crimes.
How did you kill her?
Probably strangulation.
How do you know when they're dead?
How? I don't know, just do.
You can see that he won't admit it directly. He says maybe he killed her and maybe she died by strangulation. It gets worse.
I reach over my shoulder like this, right behind my neck, and I pull out a brand new machete. When she backed out, I come up behind her.
He's just a ruthless killer. In our 3rd spot, we have Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was an infamous serial killer who was responsible for murdering 30 women. Although it's thought that this number may be even higher. He would often kill these women in brutal ways. In his interviews, he shows no remorse for his actions, and the calm tone of his voice is very disturbing.
I can see how certain feelings and ideas developed in me to the point where I began to act out on them. Certain very violent and very destructive feelings.
Throughout this whole interview, Bundy tries to gain sympathy from the interviewer and the audience. You can see how he's trying to manipulate your emotions, which is terrifying. A lot of people commented saying that Bundy is trying to act human in these interviews. He knows exactly what to say and how to say it to manipulate you.
It was like something had, say, snapped, that I knew that I couldn't control it anymore, that these barriers that I had learned as a child, that had been instilled in me, were not enough to hold me back with respect to seeking out and harming somebody.
It's a huge reason why he was so famous and had a huge media following. Moving on at number 2, we have Beth Thomas. Beth Thomas was a young girl featured in a documentary titled The Child of Rage. At such a young age, Beth displayed psychopathic tendencies, including harming her brother on a number of occasions and trying to kill her parents. Her parents were terrified of her and her brother Jonathan's safety, as they should be. Take a look at our interview.
Why is your brother afraid of you?
Because I hurt him so much.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what, at nighttime, what do your parents do to your door?
Lock it shut.
Why do they lock it shut?
Because they don't want me to hurt John.
So on a number of occasions, Beth would go into her brother's room at night to try and kill him. On top of that, she used to steal knives from the kitchen to try and harm her family with.
Big sharp ones.
And what do you want to do with those knives?
Kill John and Mommy with them, and Daddy.
That's not all. Here is her recounting the time she hurt Jonathan.
And what happened to your brother? Tell me about it.
His head hurt real bad, but his chin, he had to have stitches in it.
Now apparently doctors deemed that she acted this way as part of her traumatic past. Now it's said that after years of therapy, she is now a healthy adult. And in our number 1 spot, we have Jeffrey Dahmer.
I desensitized myself to it. I don't know, I went to great lengths.
Between 1878 to 1991, American serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer murdered and dismembered 17 men and boys. He would pack the victims' body parts into plastic bags and bury them behind his parents' home. He would also take disturbing photographs of his deceased victims and keep certain body parts as souvenirs. He also had tendencies to eat the victims. This gave him the name the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster. Upon searching his home, police found albums full of pictures of body parts, and his place was filled with human remains. Before his death, Jeffrey had an interview with Inside Edition and other news channels. In these interviews, he shares gory details about the men he killed and why he did it.
One time I brought this young man back to the hotel room, the Ambassador Hotel. Was just planning on drugging him and spending the night with him. I had no intention of hurting him.
What's creepy is how calm he is talking about all this. Like, he's murdered so many people and shows no remorse, just like all the other serial killers on this list.
I was handcuffed, and it was just the realization that there was no point in trying to hide my actions anymore.
Hearing him say that he kept the dead with him as long as possible makes me sick. When police raided his house, they found heads were in the fridge and freezer, 2 skulls were on display in the house, and they found a 57-gallon drum filled with decomposing bodies in his room.
Number 10, we have Danta Wright, who is this 17-year-old teenager who admitted to shooting Jordan Clee right in the head. This confession was shocking, and it was right in front of Jordan Clee's mom, which makes it really sad. During this whole conviction and sentencing, Danta had a big smile on his face, and because of that, it almost cost him his plea deal. Because of the plea deal, he got 25 to 53 years in prison. Maybe over that time you can figure out why this wasn't a joking matter and why he shouldn't think that this whole situation was funny. You know, it's funny to shoot someone in the head and then to tell the shocking confession right in front of the victim's mom.
What did you do with that gun in Mr. Jordan Clee?
Shot him.
And where did you shoot him?
On the top of his head.
And did you kill him with that shot?
Yes.
Number 9.
But was subjected to an overnight interrogation during which he was denied sleep. After over 8 hours of questioning and despite being innocent, Damon confessed to raping and murdering his cousin.
So that was 22-year-old Damon Thibodeaux, who was just 22 years old at the time his cousin was murdered. Well, over 15 years went by, and finally the truth came out, that he wasn't the one that murdered his cousin. Damon Thibodeaux was wrongly convicted. He was actually on death row for 15 years, and it wasn't until DNA testing became available to him that it was proven that he actually can't be the right person. Also, because Damon Thibodeaux was on death row, he was put into solitary confinement the whole time. The interrogation lasted 9 hours straight, and only 54 minutes of those hours were recorded. It's probably a really biased confession, like take out all the parts they don't want in there. Well, during those 54 minutes, you can hear Damon Thibodeaux confessing to crimes he never committed just so it can end.
Confession was factually inconsistent with the actual crime in many ways.
Now that he is out of prison, he is now an active speaker for wrongful conviction reform, but now he will always have to relive these moments in his mind forever.
You know, you're in a chair with a desk. They're allowed to manipulate you, threaten you, pretty much do whatever it takes to secure a confession from you.
It's just so wrong. I know investigators are trying to do what they can do, and they gotta put some sort of like pressure on these people to try to get the truth out, but when is that pressure like too much pressure, and when is it wrong? I think a conviction shouldn't be solely on a confession, especially if it's an extensive length of interrogation. The famous Brendan Dassey case comes up next on our list at number 8. Brendan Dassey, who has a very low IQ and wasn't really good at communicating, was interrogated for a rape and murder when he was just 16 years old. Well, after After clearly being coerced into a confession, Brendan Dassey was convicted of first-degree murder, mutilation of a corpse, and second-degree sexual assault. Those are some pretty serious crimes. He was sentenced to life in prison with the eligibility for parole in 2048. So that's when he's going to be 59 years old, which is extremely sad. Brendan Dassey wasn't able to understand much. He has a lower IQ, and he thought that if he just told investigators what they wanted to hear, that he would be able to just go back to school.
Because no one knew that, and here, if he came out and said it, then it must be the truth. And so they kept asking him, come on, Brendan, something else happened to her now. We know something else happened to her. And eventually they got more specific. What else happened to her? Something happened to her head.
Brendan Dassey during the whole interrogation was fed information that they can actually use against him. Investigators were actually getting frustrated with Brendan Dassey at one point because he wasn't understanding, the hints that they were giving him. The investigator needed him to say certain things. They needed him to say that the woman was shot, but he just wasn't saying it. So the investigators just came out and actually just told him what to say. Okay, Brendan Dassey, we have all the evidence. Who shot her in the head?
That's all I can remember.
All right, I'm just going to come out and ask you, who shot her in the head?
He did.
Why didn't you tell us that?
This case is a very interesting case, and if you guys want to know more about the Brendan Dassey or the Stephen Avery case, Stephen Avery being his uncle, well, you guys should check out Making a Murderer on Netflix. It's actually so good. Moving on to number 7.
Traumatic Twilight Zone. That's how Johnny Lee Savory describes his wrongful conviction for a double murder and rape when he was just 14 years old.
Just 14 years old. Come on, justice system. How does that make sense? This is a minor who was intensely interrogated. The poor teen wasn't even given the rights by the police officers. It took nearly 40 years for the actual truth to come out that Johnny Lee Savory wasn't actually the person who raped and fatally stabbed 14-year-old James Robinson Jr. and his sister 19-year-old Connie Cooper. Johnny's confession was coerced, and it took almost 40 years to figure that out.
Claiming his initial, later tossed confession was coerced, evidence was fabricated and destroyed, and that he was subjected to an unconstitutional interrogation without parent or attorney for 31 hours.
If I was in that room for 31 hours, I bet they can make me say whatever they wanted to make me say. I'm trying hard not to be over dramatic here, but that kind of sounds like a form of torture. Someone else who's in prison for a very long time is next up at number 6. This right here is JoAnn Taylor, and her story is really sad. She was falsely in prison for 19 years for rape and murder. I mean, that is some pretty serious crimes that she didn't commit. Interrogators threatened Taylor to come clean with the crime. They said that they already know what she has done, and they don't have a problem with putting her on death row if she doesn't tell, the truth, what they want her to say. I mean, if someone threatens you with death row, wouldn't you just make up a lie that they're forcing you to tell? Because it's better to be in prison alive than to be confined in solitary confinement until it's time, for that lethal injection.
You just need to come clean. You know what happened. You'll be the first female on death row. We don't have a problem murdering, executing women if they're just as guilty as the men.
At the time Taylor was in her 20s, she just got married, she has a newborn, the baby's 14 months old. She had a lot going on for her when she was arrested and interrogated. During this time, Taylor just wanted to go home with her family. She didn't know what the police officers were talking about. She didn't know about the crime or the details that they were describing. The interrogators really emotionally drained this woman to the point that she was crying so much, and she was becoming upset even more and more, and she was just so confused.
It was enough to start making you think. And when I knew how much I drank back in '85, because I quit drinking shortly after I left Beatrice, when I realized that how much I used to drink.
At this point, she was trying to tell them whatever they wanted to hear, and she wasn't even saying the right things because she just didn't know what was happening. So after suffering from delusions and fearing the death penalty, she just admitted to murdering Helen Wilson. Because of the long prison sentence, Taylor lost a connection with her family. She didn't even come face to face with her 14-month-old son until she was released from prison. I mean, that's really sad. Number 5.
I was told that I was going to die in jail. I was never going home. I was scared for my life, and I was screaming out that I'm innocent, and no one heard me.
So that is Tyrell Swift, who was convicted back in 1994 for a murder. An autopsy report concluded that the woman who was murdered was strangulated to death. Tyrell Swift was brought in for questioning to find out if he had any involvement with this murder. There was no trace of physical evidence that connected this man to the crime, but it was his own conviction that got him locked up for 15 years.
I was coerced and tricked into signing a confession, which ultimately led to me being convicted and spending 15.5 years in prison.
It's just so sad, and what a tragedy. It really is. It just seems like police just wants to be able to close a case, and it doesn't really matter if they have the right person or not. I mean, for the past 15 years, Tyrell Swift lost his life while the actual person who committed the murder is out there, living their life, and who knows if they killed someone else or not, because clearly they're capable of murder. Tyrell Swift's story got me really emotional. Number 4. This is Juan Rivera, who was released after he served a long time in prison after he gave a false confession. Juan Rivera was actually wrongly convicted 3 times, and because of what happened to him, he was actually given the largest wrongful conviction settlement in US history. He was given $20 million. I mean, good, I think everyone wrongly convicted should be entitled to a settlement payout. Juan Rivera was convicted of rape and stabbing an 11-year-old to death 27 times. There was no physical evidence, there was no DNA evidence that linked Juan to these crimes back in '92. After years of being in prison, Rivera kept fighting to try and get more DNA tests done to prove he isn't even the right person. For some reason, it can take years to have certain tests done, and sometimes these tests or motions are just denied. Well, for Rivera, finally his motion to test swab that was taken from the crime scene, well, it was finally granted, and the test came back showing that his DNA is not even at the crime scene. So what the heck? Number 3.
At just 19 years old, Ryan Ferguson was wrongly convicted of murder. He served nearly a decade in prison, all the while maintaining his innocence.
So that was Ryan Ferguson, who is a personal trainer, he's an author. Well, he spent 10 years in prison after being wrongly convicted for a murder in his hometown of Columbia, Missouri. Ferguson was a 17-year-old high school student at the time.
Yeah, that's exactly what I said to you earlier, man. Oh my God. Trying to get me to admit to something I didn't do.
Even during the intense investigation, Ryan Ferguson said, "You're trying to make me admit to something I didn't even do." The case against Ryan Ferguson was so brutal, it seemed like police or investigators got other people to admit things that they didn't even do. One of Ryan's close friends seemed to admit to doing something to the crime as well, and in court it seemed like Ryan's friend knew all of the details to what happened.
To remember everything.
And he was down here and he had a belt. And he had his foot on his back, on the victim's back. And he was pulling up on the belt.
Well, after 10 years went by, we find out that everything was a lie. Ryan Ferguson wasn't even at the scene of the crime, and he was 100% not involved with the murder he was being accused of. It just shows you the length that police or investigators would go through to try to have a conviction. Not even like spend all these resources on finding the truth. It just seems like to them, it doesn't matter who the fault person is. And number 2, let's actually talk about Ryan's friend. Well, his friend's name is Chuck Erickson. And he totally gave a false confession that affected himself, his own life, and his friends. Well, I should probably say former friend because, I mean, what the heck. It seemed like the pressure of the interrogation got to Chuck Erickson as well, that he had to make up a whole story to try to get out of, going to prison for a very long time. He admitted to things he never did, and Chuck Erickson wanted to make it seem like Ryan was the one who did the killing, and he was just there. But now we all know that both of them weren't even at the crime scene.
I felt the need to give a story that didn't have me as the main.
Who admits?
I lied and said I remember things I didn't remember and said he did stuff that I don't remember him doing or me doing.
I know for me, I used to wonder, well, why the heck would people even confess to something that they didn't do? And well, we have our answers. It's for many different reasons, and the pressure it can get to you. It can get to anybody. Sometimes it's better to confess and take deals. I mean, take a look at this next clip. You're about to see how pressured Chuck Erickson felt. He felt like his life was on the line.
Look, man, I do not remember. I don't know. And they started telling me, well, we're going to put your head on a chopping block
which to me basically tells me I'm going to be executed.
So he built a confession based on fear.
Because I was thinking about myself.
And finally, at number 1, we have James Harden. And no, I'm not talking about the NBA player. That would be insane. James Harden was convicted of a murder after he confessed to the crime. He was sentenced to 120 years in prison.
Defendant James Harden says he was told by police if he signed the confession, he'd be released immediately.
They had the statement already wrote up, and the man say, "Do you want to go home and sleep in your bed tonight?" So I said, hell yeah.
I mean, is this real life right now? This is not right. James never got home that night. Instead, he had to put on the orange jumpsuit. James Harden had to wear that suit for the next 16 years. He was frightened, terrified, confused, and only 17 years old when he was forced into a confession that would change the rest of his life. James Harden literally signed his life away. This is why it is super important to know exactly what you're signing. And I remember when I was in grade, I think grade like 6, maybe grade 7, first day of school I had a new teacher. The teacher handed out some sheets, there was a lot of information on it, it was double-sided. He told us to turn over the page, sign on the bottom, and then all of a sudden he collected the papers. He then read out what the paper said. It said something like, if you agree to all the terms on this paper, make sure you sign it. So my signature's on the paper, the whole class's signature's on the paper, and the paper said everything that belongs to us now belongs to the teacher. There was a bunch of things on the paper that if we knew what it was, we never would have signed it. The teacher taught us a tough lesson on the first day of school. Luckily he had a shredder and he literally shredded it all up. And we all found it funny, but for these people on this list, it's no joke. It's not funny. It's real life. I think it's a horrible crime to make someone sign something that they have no idea what it is, or make them confess to something that they didn't do with false promises.
Starting off this countdown, we have Eileen Wuornos. Eileen Wuornos is often considered the first female serial killer. She was found guilty of killing 7 men. She would murder them, rob them, and then drive home in their cars. Although she claims every murder was self-defense. In our interview, we can see how lax she is when talking about killing.
Just shot in self-defense, boom, boom, boom. You know, they weren't cut up, they weren't sliced up, no OJ jazz, you know. And he said, I did the most horrendous crime in the whole wide world.
Death and murder literally doesn't faze her at all. In fact, she claims that what she did wasn't even bad. Yeah, she tries to justify her actions by saying she just shot them, as if that's not a big deal.
But you've been convicted of killing 7 men.
Everybody's looking at the number.
Does that not, you killed 7 men, 7 strangers, does that not make you a serial killer?
So I didn't kill them every day, did I?
Again, she's acting like her killing 7 men isn't a big deal. Like, oh, it's just 7 men, people have done worse. It's crazy.
Now at number 9, we have a Marine wife's murder. A former Marine shocked the courtroom during his murder trial when he admitted to strangling the wife of another Marine and pushing her head first down on an abandoned mine shaft in a remote California desert. He initially pleaded not guilty, but after a 2-month search, he said that people have to know what he did. He said he made the decision to kill her because he was controlled by anger. He claimed that she molested one of his family members. Number 8, we have 49-year-old Richard Houghton, who admitted in court that he is a rapist and that he raped a 17-year-old and he knew that she was underage, and he was quite proud of it actually. When he was asked by the prosecutors, did you know that she was a minor? He said yes. He said he lost his head and he actually killed 17-year-old Tara Willenberg, which is just so disturbing. In court, this guy seems so calm, like he just doesn't care. Richard is already a convicted sex offender, so I'm not sure why he's currently out of jail and why he had the opportunity to do this again. Clearly he was still in contact with the minors. Condolences goes out to this little girl's family, friends, and loved ones, and my condolences goes out to all the victims on this list. Number 7, we have another very shocking confession in court. 33-year-old John Hughes in court admitted to killing a truck driver. John was being convicted for this one murder, but it was shocking to hear that he actually admitted that there were other people as well. He was caught for one, but he admitted that there were many more out there. In court, he was asked, did you feel remorse? And he said no. He said, would he do it again? And John said his brain works differently and he just wants to kill people, and right now he just wants to die. Listen to what he said when he was asked, how many people have you killed?
As far as the murders that I've been a part of, but there's been quite a few.
A dozen?
At least.
20?
Under.
Somewhere around the 15?
somewhere around in there.
It's always disturbing watching these confessions because you just don't know what is going to be said next. How has this guy killed that many people, and it's just now that he's getting caught? Because he confessed to never not killing people, he will be behind bars for the rest of his life. Alright, number 6, we have a confession from 13-year-old Alex King. This teenager was on trial for murdering his father. Alex killed his father Terry alongside his 14-year-old brother Derek King, who joined in as well on the killing. And they used a baseball bat before setting their home on fire. In court, Alex King made a shocking confession as a plea deal. As a plea deal, the teens received 22 years to life without parole, as well as up to 30 years for arson. Jalal Smith-Riley comes into this disturbing and shocking list at number 5. Jalal is 23 years old and he was convicted of attempted robbery that turned into murder. Jalal in court was pleading not guilty during his trial, but something shockingly happened halfway through the sentencing. Jalal out of nowhere confessed to murder and tried to get a plea deal. As soon as Jalal confessed, he broke down crying like crazy in the courtroom. This came as a huge shock because this was a 3-year-old murder case that has been ongoing, and finally he confessed to the crime he committed. The family felt a little bit better and they felt a little bit relieved from this case because they said that this is the first step of healing, but they do want Jalal to get a life sentence.
The Ohio Department of Corrections, mandatory and consecutive underlying offenses, all those counts are consecutive each other. Credit for time served amount of 349 days.
Number 4, we have 76-year-old Fraser Glenn Miller Jr., who was accused of killing 3 people at Overland Park Jewish Community Center near Kansas City. The court wanted to make sure that Fraser knew what happened and that he killed 3 people in this racist attack. Well, in court, Fraser was just supposed to be present, not testify, he wasn't supposed to speak. Well, on his way out of the courtroom, he said this.
I attacked the Jewish Center of Jews against genocide against white people. I have a right.
These crimes took place in 2014, and right now he's on death row, and he's expected to die by lethal injection. Number 3, we have Lawrence Bittaker. Lawrence, alongside Roy Lewis Norris, were known as the Toolbox Killers after a series of killings and rapes that occurred in a period of 5 months in Southern California back in 1979. Lawrence, when he was caught, confessed to kidnapping, rape, torture, and murder of 5 teenage girls.
Lawrence Bittaker, with an IQ of 138, dragged high school girls into his van, then murdered them by twisting a coat hanger around their throat with a pair of pliers.
Number 2, listen to this.
Shot once, missed. Shot a second time, hit. He was driving 10-15 miles an hour, so it was rather slow. Ran around the hood of the car. I heard him gurgling, so I shot him again and then shoved him down in the ditch.
When this guy was asked what should his prison sentence be, he replied with the death sentence. The officers questioning him asked, well, why is that? And then the killer said, well, it's an eye for an eye. The most shocking thing about this case might be the sentencing. The killer was found not guilty by reasoning of insanity. This is actually a new law in place just weeks before this case happened. So this killer was sentenced to a hospital and not to a prison. Finally, at number 1, we have Steven Sanderson, who admitted to killing his cellmate, but he was very proud of it, and that's why he wanted to confess what he did to the courts and plead guilty to the murder charge. Steven killed Theodore because he said he was a child molester. Steven told the judge that he actually wanted to explain in detail the whole situation.
That night he was trying to justify why he did it, and I just told him to be quiet and he would have to leave in the morning to find a new cell, but he continued to talk about it and try to justify it. So he was a little bit bigger than me, so I got down and I hit him in his face a few times, and when he fell, I wrapped a cord around his neck and I took his life.
I mean, that is just absolutely insane. Is this real life right now? Steven is already serving life without parole. Something tells me that those types of people should be isolated from everyone else, because what else do these guys have to lose? He already is in life in there, so why not just kill more and more people who bug him?